Welcome back to Middle-earth. It's Sam here at Jedi Bricks, and today I'm going to be creating a Tolkien and Peter Jackson inspired Lego world by combining all of Lego's best medieval sets and minifigures, making maps and lore for all of our characters, and building a full Lego medieval universe. Also, to celebrate the relaunch of the Jedi Bricks channel here on YouTube, I am giving away one free copy of Gandalf Arrives, the first ever Lego Lord of the Rings set, this month, and all you have to do to enter is subscribe to the channel and comment down on this video. But as many of you know, ever since I was young, I've been hugely inspired by Tolkien's writing and also tales of dragons, largely Western ones like Eragon, but also I'm a massive history nerd. I love the Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings, the Franks, the Celts, the Romans, the Greeks, but I wanted to try and combine all of these passions and interests with my Lego hobby. So let me tell you a tale of deeds both great and small, of bravery most humble and magic long thought lost. Aldarion is the king of Pelargir. He inherited the throne as a young boy in the midst of a great war and only survived thanks to the companions who you are about to meet. Although a young and untested king, he proved wise in defending his kingdom, using his ancestral throne at Parvenion as a base of power to unite the free cities of Pelargir. Oldcastle, Dragonreach and Helena all swore allegiance, and as long as the trade flowed freely, Castamir was also loyal to the king. We find him now 12 years older, in the prime of his life. Most of his people see him as a wise but firm leader, and he has just married Lady Arya of Dragonreach before setting out, leading a company of trusted knights on a quest to reclaim their lost lands. And so to make him, I removed the armour from the paladin, added a kind bearded faceprint, and finished him off with this tan hairpiece. Providing battle strategy and wisdom is Sir Osmond of Oldcastle, the master at arms to the king's family since before Aldarion was born. He has even fought in the great dragon wars of the First Age, slaying the northern warlord Hrothgar in single combat. So to make Osmond, I used the full armoured paladin, along with this older bearded faceprint from Lego Star Wars and a short grey hairpiece. And I was really happy with how wise and experienced he ended up looking. But joining them is Osmond's young nephew, Damien Blacksteel, who was recently blooded in a minor battle and is determined to prove himself with both short sword and shield. To make him, I used the full paladin armor again, and to show his serious, youthful character, I used this angry, clean-shaven facial expression, which I think works nicely. An often overlooked member of the company is the sharp-witted bowmaster William the Quick of Castamir. As the son of a minor nobleman, he had grown up with the king at court, but as William had grown older, he could be found more often at taverns and with the common folk than amongst the nobles. To make William, I reversed the torso, revealing the pouch of gold that he uses to get out of awkward situations. And then I equipped him with a crossbow and a quiver of arrows, and perhaps the greatest warrior amongst them is Rogar of the Heavy Hand, the last in a line of ancient Pelargian warriors, and the king's personal bodyguard. He is famed across the lands for his mighty war axe and the fiery colour of his hair, which has led to the rest of the company calling him Fireball. To make him, I added a bassinet helmet and a two-handed war axe, but because of how strong he is, he often wields it one-handed with a shield. So the stage is set, but this story really begins with our company of knights and their king during peacetime, when they suddenly hear from a wounded messenger that Lord Osgrey the Old Lion has fallen fighting in the Dreadmore. The messenger is gasping for breath and cries, "The Dark Tower is emptied, sire, and evil is upon us. Forgive me," before promptly fainting to the floor. But to find out what dark fate destiny has in store for this company of knights and their king, make sure to tune in for part 2. Last episode, we saw the young king Aldarion grow into a strong leader and gather his king's company of knights. He also married Lady Arya of Dragonreach, but then news reached them that Lord Osgrey had been killed defending the borderlands from an unknown enemy force. And so the wedding was cut short and the king's men prepared to march. Joining our company on their quest was Forlas Ironheart, the grim blacksmith at Castle Parvenion, but also Dodger, the king's squire. And Dodger had actually been tasked to find Forlas, and when he found Forlas, Forlas cuffed him on the ear for interrupting his work, before Dodger pleaded that, "Mr. Forlas, but the king sent me because he goes to fight." And at that, the surly blacksmith picked up his hammer and axe and marched off to find the king. As Aldarion departed, he wished farewell to his new wife, Lady Arya, who would fly back to Dragonreach and recruit their faithful dragon warriors to their cause. The first part of their journey was rather uneventful, at least until they made camp in Greenwood the Fair, where from behind the trees they could hear a humming and a whistling. Their hands went to their swords, but before anyone could react, a pair of antlers and a flash of green and then silence, as if the one humming had suddenly realised that they were no longer alone. A few seconds later, a small creature stepped out from behind a large old oak trunk. He was a stout little fellow, about 4 feet high and covered in leaves and branches. He seemed to be carrying an odd-looking staff with flowers and leaves atop it, and a small bird sat perched upon his arm. The peculiar nature of this finding left our heroic knights speechless, and so they were all rather shocked when it was the halfling who broke the silence first. "Oh, merry old Pip, what have I found? Big folk have come, and danger abounds." The king smiled, rather taken aback by this little fellow. "Fear not, stout friend, I'm King Aldarion. My men and I travel to the Dreadmuir, for dark tidings have come from the east, and the old lion stands alone. But we mean you no harm. Pray, tell me, what are you?" The halfling was confused, but met the king's gaze and said, "A healer am I, of Meriadoc's folk, small are we, but lovers of trees, and I am the last of my kind. Pip they called me when there was we." The king was even more confused by this answer, but a healer would be a very valuable thing on the road to come. "Master Pip, we are in need of a healer, one skilled in the ways of nature. Would you join us on this quest? Perhaps there will be more of your kind on the way." Pip looked down at the little bird, and it chirped softly to him. To the men it seemed as if they were talking to each other. He then looked worried for a second before abruptly nodding to the bird and announcing, "The birds have warned me of this, the darkness in the east. Many of them are fleeing the shores never to return. I go now to find the truth of this. I will journey with you for a time." The new member of the company brought an odd look to the men. 5 battle-ready warriors, 1 angry-looking blacksmith, a grubby young squire, and a single leaf-covered halfling carrying a flimsy old staff. But having a healer gave the men heart, and Pip seemed an altogether merry little fellow. After a brief rest, the men quickly rode on for Osgrey's watch, and upon arrival, they found the portcullis partially open, with a body crushed beneath its weight. Dodger, the smallest of the company, quickly scurried up the Queen's Tree, working the portcullis cranks until it was open fully. The sight that met the men's eyes filled them all with a dark sense of dread. 3 more bodies lay further inside the entrance, all wearing the same strange armour as the first crushed one. In the back corner lay a warrior crested in blue and gold. It was Dondarrion Osgrey, the son of the old fallen lord. His helmet was cracked and bent, and a sword was sticking from his side. He clutched a tattered scroll in his hand. The king reached down for it and read the message before speaking it aloud to his men. "My lord Osgrey, I have most urgent news for you. The Eastern Watch is gone. At Dreadmuir, a new lord has risen calling himself Bloodgarm, and has led his warband from the Eastern lands. They come now for Osgrey's watch, and if I do not deliver this to you in hand, I am surely dead. My daughter Morwen will command the rangers in my place now that I am gone. Find her at the taverns of Castamir. She will be loyal to the king. Yours faithfully, Angrad, captain of the Forest Rangers." And before the men could react to this dire news, a shrieking horn was heard outside the walls of the Lion's Watch. The king rose quickly, as did all his men. He drew his sword and cried, "The Lion's fort will not fall. 2 positions, men, ready for battle. For Osgrey, for freedom, and for Pelagir." Pip quickly perched himself atop the Queen's Tree, his staff in hand, while Dodger scurried to the oil pot, shouting he was ready to burn those buggers the same colour as their armour. Forlas charged after him, shouting, "Shot it, boy, we have to heat the oil first. Grab me a darn torch." William the Quick was already taking aim atop the tower, and the king led the rest of his men to stand before the now closed portcullis gate. 15 enemies were closing in. Some bore the red dragon mark of Magroth, and others bore a new wolf marking. One of them appeared to be a sorcerer, carrying a staff topped with bone. William loosed a number of crossbow bolts before anyone could do anything, and 2 of the enemy soldiers fell clutching at their chests. The rest of the enemies didn't waste any more time and charged at the king and his bodyguards. At the last second, Rogar of the Heavy Hand hefted his axe sideways, dropped his shield, and charged directly into 3 of the oncoming soldiers, barreling them all to the floor and breaking the enemy line, before quickly hefting his axe into the skull of the closest unfortunate enemy.
Damien Blacksteel, keen not to be outdone, ducked and stabbed with his short sword, gutting one soldier to the left and then slashing into the side of another, almost taking his head clean off. The king himself stepped to the side of a clumsy swing and brought his longsword down, severing the would-be Kingslayer's arm at their elbow. Terror filled the enemy soldier's eyes as he clutched at his stump. But before the king could finish the job, 2 more enemies had circled him in, using their shields to block his way. The king growled, his eyes sparking with the fire of battle, and he suddenly dropped low to a crouch, sweeping his longsword through the unprotected legs of the 2 soldiers before they could react, and watching them topple to the floor. Off to the side, Osmond of Oldcastle faced his own challenge. He had already cut down one of the 4 enemies facing him, but these spears were keeping him at bay, and one would catch him soon enough. His sword just wasn't long enough. It was at this moment that Forlas Ironheart came roaring out of the gate. An axe came flying past Osmond's ear and struck one of the enemies in the face, before Forlas's hammer came down, crushing upon the helm of a second. Osmond took advantage of the 3rd enemy's shock to sidestep the wandering spear and stab clean through his visor slit. The king looked around. The men had been so busy cutting the enemies down, they hadn't noticed that Pip the halfling was pointing his staff down at the enemy wizard. They seemed to be locked in some kind of trance, a magician's duel. The enemy sorcerer seemed to suddenly exit this state and notice how dire his situation had become. He roared and let loose a vicious streak of red light, blinding the knights. But this time, it was not directed at Pip. Instead, it struck Damien Blacksteel clean across the chest, sending him flying back into the wall with a sickening thud before he lay still where he fell. Anger filled the king's mind. He knew bringing young, brave Damien was a risk, but before he could charge and slay the dark wizard himself, the man was gone.
We join our company here as they kneel beside young Damien. Pip the halfling was chanting strange incantations with his staff raised as the men remained in a tense silence. Damien's body was badly burned, but his chest rose and fell faintly. Pip dropped to his knees and placed his hands upon Damien's chest, before suddenly vines began to appear across Damien's body, covering his skin as the flowering petals reached their full size. The men were in shock, but before they could react, the flowers all disappeared, revealing a body unburnt by flame. Damien took a rasping breath and sat up sharply, sending Pip reeling backwards into Rogar of the Heavy Hand. Dodger the Squire gasped, and Forlas Ironheart chuckled grimly. But it was Damien's uncle, Osmond of Oldcastle, who roared, grasped his nephew by the shoulders, and half shouted, "You're 1 part brave and 3 parts fool, son!" Damien offered a rare smile, showing his youth, before he clasped his uncle's shoulder back and let out a, "Is this paradise, uncle? Cool, it stinks!" The king couldn't help but laugh as he turned to Pip, looking upon the halfling with a newfound respect and awe. "I know not how you performed such an act, Pip, though I am grateful you are with us, and we are all in your debt." Pip hummed softly, and the bird flew down to his arm, chirping in harmony. "'Twas my mother who taught me the old ways, that nature heals and seals the evil of man. Thank me not, but thank the trees, the roots and leaves, and the muddy earth from which all grows, for dark will be the days when nature goes." There was no more time for celebration. The note the men had found upon the slain body of Dondarrion Osgrey told them of the next step upon this quest. Dark armies were rising in the east, and the forest rangers awaited the king in Castamir. They rode swiftly, crossing the Numenath River before reaching the outskirts of Castamir. The tavern district lay at the edge of the city on the banks of a small lake, and William the Quick had been born here, so knew the streets well. He led the company along an old stone path running alongside some woodland. "This has got to be the place, my lord, the old Plainside Inn. I think we should find the rangers there." As the men approached the tavern, Dodger noticed a dark shadow hovering in the trees. His face was hooded and his clothing dark. Dodger went to cry out, but as the sound left his mouth, the figure snarled and jumped from its cover, landing next to the king with a dagger drawn. It had grey skin and cruel eyes that spoke only of death and despair. As it stabbed the blade forwards into the king, his body faltered sharply, a piercing thud coming from its back. The king looked up sharply to the left, seeing a tall, graceful lady standing atop the tavern roof, a bow already notched with another arrow, as 3 men climbed next to her, their own bows all in hand. 4 more arrows pierced the creature before anyone could move, and it fell clutching at its chest, uttering, "Death will find you, king. Your lands will burn." The creature looked ready to die, but Osmond suddenly swung his longsword and beheaded it. The body stood there for a moment, the head bouncing to the side, before Osmond grunted and kicked the body to the floor. I'd had just about enough of his talk. Assassins shouldn't be seen or heard, and he was darn well both. He ruffled Dodger's hair and said, "Good work, lad. Eyes of a hawk you have. Give our William a run for his money, wouldn't you now?" Dodger puffed out his chest and smiled proudly, before marching over to the king and mimicking his stance. The king was shocked, but equally eager to thank the mysterious lady and her bowman. He turned to find them no longer atop the roofs, but standing at the door of the Plain Sight Inn. The king stepped forward and spoke. "Though it suffices to say thank you, I feel I'm already far more in your debt, lady. A king's blood may stain this road, were it not for the swift endeavour of your arrows and the sure nature of your aim. Are you the lady that we seek, Morwen, daughter of Angrad, captain of the Eastern Rangers?" She bowed softly, and now composed, said, "I am your captain, sire, though a mere huntress in spirit. Would you join us inside? I will share with you all that I know." The company filed into the tavern, leaving a ranger on watch at the doorway and finding the rest of the forest men perched inside looking grimly at them. Lady Morwen pointed down at a map laid across the table where an X was marked at the Bromswood. She spoke then. "The fell men came in the night, killing our children and burning our forest. This is where my father fell, and in his dying wishes, he ordered me to flee and lead what remains of my people here. To give you this message, sire." She placed a note over the map, reading, "A dark sorcerer has risen out of the shadows of the east. The scars of old wounds lie open and festering, and Pelagir's peril cannot be underestimated. Magroth rises again." One of the rangers, a hardy-looking man named Huor, added gravely, "I carried this message from the dying hands of our late Captain Angrad, as he lay poisoned at the roots of our God's tree. Our messages to Osgrey's watch went unanswered." The king processed this information, reeling from the dire news. Sir Osmond often spoke of how the eastern lands had been laid barren and burnt in the dragon wars of the First Age. Many centuries before, Magroth the Fallen had been a dark elf and dragon rider, whose thirst for power had led him to turn against the sacred order of Dragonreach. Many dragons died then, and it was said that the skies rained with blood, but Magroth had long been dead. Osmond of Oldcastle spoke next. "The way I see it, we have only one option, and that is to make for Oldcastle, where I have 100 men or more garrisoned. From there we can send word to the free cities of Pelagir and raise what other loyal forces we can." It was good advice from the old Master-at-Arms, and it was their only option. Oldcastle lay closest on the road, but the king knew 100 men would do little if Magroth or his followers had somehow returned. The king needed his wife. He needed Lady Arya and the last warriors of Dragonreach. Fire must be met with fire. The king turned to Morwen and asked quickly, "Will you ride with us, lady, and your forest men also?" But before she could reply, the tavern door burst open and the ranger on watch fell inside, the stump of his hand pouring blood onto the floor. His eyes met Lady Morwen's with a frantic urgency as he coughed up blood and spluttered, "Lady, forgive me," before keeling to the floor dead. Everyone jumped to their feet with their hands on their weapons as the sound of many men was heard outside. The king's men formed a tight line in the centre of the room, steeling themselves for whatever was about to come through that door. Dodger practically fell over trying to get behind Forlas, who simply hefted the boy over his shoulder and dumped him onto a stool behind him. "There you are, lad. Have a seat." The jest was momentary, for a dark shadow stepped into the doorway, a long staff in one hand. It was the sorcerer from Osgrey's watch. Behind him stood 20 men or more, all bearing cruel-looking blades and the red dragon marks of Magroth. The sorcerer's eyes rested haughtily upon Pip the halfling before it spoke first. "Greetings from my master. He has been expecting you." But to find out what happens next, make sure to tune in for part 4 when we will journey back into the world of Pelagir. Expect dragons, side quests, Easter eggs, and new locations like Oldcastle and Dragonreach. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Let me know what your favourite detail was, and I'll see you guys on the next video.